Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being with us tonight. I'll call this meeting of the Bloomington City Council to order. Thank you all for joining us here in the chambers. Thanks to everybody watching on TV and online. We'll start our meeting as we always do with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you would, please stand and join me in the pledge. Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, that sounded great. That was the most I've ever heard in this chambers here. Thanks for doing that. Once again, thanks for being here this evening. Thanks for tuning in. We have an agenda this evening that I'd like to go through very quickly here, and then we will approve the agenda. We have, first up, our introductory items where we're going to introduce some new employees with the City of Bloomington, and then talk on mission moment and introduction of our racial equity action teams again this week. Councilmember Martin has a consent business this week. We've got 11 items on the consent agenda. And under hearings, resolutions, and ordinances, we've got a public hearing for a vacation of a public scenic easement at 7981 Leah Circle. Then item 4.2, we've got a resolution accepting the city clerk's certificate of sufficiency of the petition for a charter amendment, and that, of course, is the ranked choice voting issue. Just want to make clear to everybody that this is a pretty procedural type thing that we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to accept the petition, basically. This isn't a public hearing. There isn't a whole lot of public input here. This is basically, we're just going to note that it meets the requirements, and we're going to accept it, and then we'll lay out for you so you understand fully the schedule moving forward, what the next steps in all of this are, just to be clear as to what we are going to accomplish this evening. Under item 5, our organizational business, we're going to be talking about a facilities maintenance service evaluation follow-up, and then we're going to talk strategic priorities fund project recommendations, our city council policy and issue update, and then we are done. So, that is the agenda for this evening. Council, any additions or corrections to the agenda? Councilmember Lohman?
Mayor, would you be at all interested in moving the 4.2 up on the agenda?
I guess we could have that conversation. I hadn't planned on it, but we could certainly do that. Councilmember Nelson?
I would just note interested in this, and it's a fairly procedural, quick type item. If we got it knocked off, they knew those next steps, as you just mentioned. We could move on to the other stuff, and they could stay if they want, or they could, because it's very exciting to watch a city council meeting in its entirety. So please, you're welcome to stay. I'm not trying to get rid of you. Just, it's procedural. It's going to be quick.
Councilmember Lohman and Nelson, do we have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Lohman, second by Councilmember Nelson to amend tonight's agenda to move item 4.2, and I'm assuming we're going to move it all the way up to in front of the introductory items?
I'm leaving it at your discretion.
We'll move it up ahead of the introductory items, so we'll take that on right away. We've got a motion and a second. Council discussion on this? No further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. So that would move up item 4.2 in our agenda. Now we have an amended agenda, and with hearing no other changes from the council, I will move our amended agenda for this evening.
Second.
Motion and a second by Councilmember Lohman to adopt our amended agenda. No further council discussion on this. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. We have an agenda for this evening. And as amended, then, we will move to item 4.2, which is the resolution accepting the city clerk's certificate of sufficiency of the petition for a charter amendment. Ms. Manderscheid and Ms. Scipione are going to lead us through this. Ms. Manderscheid, good evening.
Good evening. Mike, can you pull up the PowerPoint, please? All right, Mayor, members, I have tonight with me, can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay. I have tonight with me the city clerk, and this is our second stop. We were at the Charter Commission on the 7th. We have an overview PowerPoint presentation that covers a lot of the same material that was provided to the Charter Commission. So with that, let's move to the second slide. I thought it would be helpful to provide a bit of an overview of how, what's happened leading up to this. Back in May of 2020, there were charter amendments to amend the city charter to create the language necessary for ranked choice voting. That was approved by the voters in November of 2020. And then in April and in June, the council took action to implement ranked choice voting by adopting ordinances. And then in that process, we discovered we needed to do a slight clarification edit in section 4.04 of the charter related to write-in candidates. So that was a quick amendment as well. And then we had our first election using ranked choice voting in November of 2021. Next slide. So fast forward to today. Most recently, the clerk received the petition on June 21st of last month, transmitted that petition to the Charter Commission's recording secretary the next day. That is a process that's provided for in state law. And thereafter, the Charter Commission chair was notified, and the chair called a special meeting. We worked with the recording secretary to schedule that meeting. It was over the 4th of July holiday, so it was a little bit tricky to get that out, but we were able to meet as early as July 7th. And at that meeting, the Charter Commission acknowledged receipt of the petition, and that is a statutory step in the process. The following day, the Charter Commission secretary notified the city clerk, and that put into motion a 10-day period of time, which gets us to tonight, wherein the city clerk issued a certificate of sufficiency that was in the packet a few days ago, and the clerk is available to talk about that tonight. Again, this is all a statutory process provided for in state law, chapter 410-12. All right, so as mentioned, tonight we're here on the petition. If the petition is sufficient, then the next step in the statutory process is to set the ballot language. The proposed timeline for doing that would be August 8th or the 15th. This is because the language is due to the county by August 26th. I'm not inclined to put it on the special meeting on August 22nd because that's a budget discussion. And in the past, we have had a couple of conversations about that ballot language, and so I don't want to wait until the last meeting. I want to ideally have a discussion on the 8th or the 15th. Next slide. So tonight, the clerk is prepared to talk about that certificate of sufficiency, again, a procedural step in the process set forth in state law. These are the specific findings that the clerk went through. There are very specific findings in state law. There's format requirements, and then the clerk went through and looked at all the petition signatures. There's a threshold in state law, and that was calculated. The duplicate signatures were removed, the non-registered voters were removed, and the clerk provided that certificate of sufficiency in the packet this evening. Next slide. So you might be wondering what the petition actually says. The petition seeks to make 4 amendments to the charter. I thought it might be helpful to just give you a little bit of sense of what those amendments are. The first one restores the primary that was removed as a result of the amendments made when ranked choice voting was put in place. If the petition as proposed is on the ballot and approved, the primary would be required again. The second section is related to the filing of candidates, and again goes back to that language pre-amendment. One note here, though, is that if the petition is approved by the voters and by amendment, amending the charter by ballot, we would still need to go and do that cleanup that we had done previously because this particular amendment seeks to take it back to the beginning, and we need to do that cleanup because it made the write-in candidates, it made a clarification there and some other edits that we all agreed were a good idea. So we would need to and want to do that again. The third part is election procedures. That again, we would need to amend our city ordinances to be consistent with the petition if it's adopted. And then finally, in 4.08, it's creating a 2-step process. So if the charter is amended as proposed, we have some concerns that there could be, the amendment could be subject to a legal challenge, specifically because the second step in the process that the petition is creating is a future vote requirement of 2/3. And we know that state law only requires 51% on a ballot question. So if you remember when we were working on Jennison and the solid waste questions, there was a two-step process in that. So this particular item is similar in that way. However, the timing constraints aren't the same in that we don't have the real quick time pressure that we had with the solid waste questions. So to the point of this, I bring this up because, one, I want to raise it to your attention, but then also because case law tells us that we cannot place a question on the ballot if it's manifestly unconstitutional, inconsistent or preempted by state law, or otherwise inconsistent with public policy. So to that end, in researching this question, there are two different statutes in play. One is 410.12 and the other one is 410.21. 410.12, 410.21. And one of those provides the process by which the charter can be amended. And it specifically states it's the only way that the charter can be amended. And in that language is the 51% requirement. There's another section of state law in that same chapter, 410.21, that provides language about charter cities and how they administer elections. And so the question that was submitted to the Attorney General last week was, which of these is controlling? And so we hope that we will get a response from the Attorney General on that. We don't know whether we will or not, but if we do, we'll have some guidance as to how to proceed. And that is frankly why we did a two-step process here by which we'll set the ballot ballot language potentially in the future. We wanted to get some clarification because the law is not clear and there isn't a great deal of case law to guide us on this question. All right, next slide. So again, with regard to next steps, tonight the council is asked to approve the resolution accepting the clerk's certificate of sufficiency. And moving forward, potentially the council will be asked to set ballot language on August 8th or 15th. And then again, once approved, we would submit that ballot language to the county. If submitted to the county, it would appear on the November 8th election. Any questions? And we also have the clerk here.
Questions, Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. And more so, I'm just wanting to, and this may be more a question for you, Mayor, just to clarify what the council's role is this evening. I'm concerned with one of the provisions that's moving forward in here, the 4.08. I think the city attorney has laid out the question, and it doesn't sound that we have the answer to that this evening. But is my understanding that what we're doing this evening is not looking at the language that's being submitted today. My understanding is that what we are doing today is we are looking to see if there is sufficient petition in order to pass that on to the next part of the process. Is that my understanding, or if I have questions about the language 4.08, should I raise those now or later?
Councilmember Lohman, I think what we're approving tonight is their certificate of sufficiency. And the certificate of sufficiency, meaning that the petition satisfies all general form requirements, it was thoroughly inspected and verified, signed by 5% of the required number of registered voters in the city of Bloomington, and that all pages were properly attested with a complete affidavit. That's what we're attesting to tonight. And that is the first step in this process. It's as laid out by state law, there are steps to do all of this. This is the step that we're taking tonight. It is accepting the city clerk's certificate of sufficiency of the petition for the charter amendment tonight. Council, additional questions? Ms. Scipione, anything to add to all that we've been talking about?
I do not have anything to add. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Council, anything additional? If not, I would look for action on item 4.2.
Mayor, I'd be happy to make that.
Councilmember Lohman.
Mayor, I'd move to adopt a resolution accepting the city clerk's certificate of sufficiency of the petition for a charter amendment.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Lohman, second by Councilmember Martin, to adopt the resolution accepting the city clerk's certificate of sufficiency of the petition for a charter amendment. No further council discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. So our next steps will be, if we can go back to that slide, or the slide is gone now, either August 8th or the 15th, where we'll then work to talk about ballot language. Is that correct?
Mayor members, that is correct, yes.
Okay.
And actually, just because the public is here, just to point out that, as a reminder, our packet comes out a couple of days before that, and that information is available on our city website. So the agenda and the supporting materials comes out typically on Thursday afternoon, barring, some sort of surprise or something in people's schedules. So people can be looking for that
Okay.
around then.
All right, so first step in this process was through the Charter Commission. This was the second step, and we're working our way through the process. So thank you all very much. Thank you. All right, with that, thank you very much. It was a very administrative step that we needed to take on all this. So thanks for being here tonight. And as Councilmember Nelson said, you're welcome to stay and listen and watch the rest of the council meeting. If you choose to leave, please ask them to turn on the air conditioning when you leave. We will go back on our agenda now to item 2.1, which is the introduction of new employees. And I believe we have 3 folks we're going to meet this evening in our Community Development Department. Carla Henderson, our Community Development Director, is going to introduce these folks to us. Why don't we give folks just a second here, Carla, to settle just a little bit if we could.
Talk soon.
All right, folks, we'll get started here. If you have any outside or side conversations, if you could please take them out into the lobby, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you much. All right, Ms. Anderson, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce 3 new city employees. I am going to start with Scott Novotny. He started with us as an electrical inspector on June 6th. So Scott used to work for the city of Bloomington for 2 years and then went on to work for the state of Minnesota as one of their regional electrical inspectors for state projects for 18 years. Then went to go teach at Dunwoody, and he has rejoined the team and will be the primary inspector for the central portion of the city.
Good evening, Scott. If you could please step up to the microphone and
Thank you.
welcome.
So yeah, this is my second stint, I guess, in the city of Bloomington, and first time around, I loved it here. And I guess actually I worked for the University of Minnesota system, so I covered the whole state of Minnesota. And then I was on the board of electricity for 8 years, and then I guess COVID hit, and I went to teaching for a while, and now I'm back to inspecting. So I love the city of Bloomington. I'm just happy to be back and working for the city again. So
Your name and your role rang a bell, and I think our paths may have crossed at the University of Minnesota
it could have probably been, yes.
years ago. Yes, I think they probably did.
So,
Well, welcome. Welcome back. I'm glad to have you on board.
okay, thank you.
Thanks for being here this evening.
Next, I'd like to introduce Mallory Rickbayou, who joined us on June 21st. So Mallory grew up in Minnesota and is happy to return after several years in Indiana. She has a bachelor's degree from St. Cloud State in Recreation and Sports Management and a master's degree in Public Health from Indiana University. She previously worked for the city of Bloomington, Indiana, serving as the bicycle coordinator, and she also worked on sidewalk planning. She will focus on a mixture of current planning and long-range planning and will be our first planner who has worked in more than one Bloomington. A fun fact about Mallory is that she is a competitive baker, and so we can't wait for her to participate in our potlucks. So, Mallory.
Good evening, Mallory. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Manager. My name is Mallory Rickbile. I am thrilled to be here in what is now my second Bloomington chronologically. And so I came into this role as a transportation planner and multimodal advocate. And so I am super excited to continue my work, continue my education on the land use and zoning side of that work. And so I'm really happy to report that my team is great. My supervisors have been super supportive and giving me a lot of tools to work with and opportunities to contribute. So I really look forward to working on those projects and bringing them to you and moving forward.
Well, great. I do have to ask how your planning role, your knowledge, your experience in planning, how does that translate into competitive baking?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's all strategy. So.
Okay.
And research.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Welcome to your second Bloomington. Glad to have you on board. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Caitlin Frost. So Caitlin started June 27th as our office coordinator in building and inspections. Caitlin is a resident of Bloomington and comes from the private sector with a background in supervision and administration. Caitlin received her bachelor's in business management with a minor in economics from Iowa State and came back to Minnesota to pursue a career in local government. And she is an avid softball player.
Good evening, Caitlin. Welcome.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. Good evening. Sorry, I'm really nervous. No, I'm super excited to be here. Everyone has been super welcoming. I do come from a background in private. I've worked in childcare and done a lot of supervision and just being able to grow and just shape those children's minds, and with my employees as well that I used to supervise. Everyone has been super welcoming, and just like Mallory says, it's a great division to be within, and everyone, man, I can't explain or just show as much gratitude as everyone has been showing. So I'm really excited to be here and just be able to shape and grow my team as well.
Well, good. We're very glad to have you on staff. Very glad to have you living in the city as well.
Yes,
But,
yes.
When you were moving back to the Twin Cities, what made you choose Bloomington?
My mom lives in Bloomington, so I grew up in Richfield, so not too far from here, and I'm very family orientated. So just being able to be 5 minutes from my mom is really what I needed and what I want to do. So
Good for you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, welcome.
thanks.
Thanks for being here tonight.
I will say, your experience working with children should prepare you well for working with this council.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Scott, Mallory, Caitlin, welcome aboard. Glad to have you here. Thanks much for being here this evening. On to item 2.2 on our agenda, which is a mission moment, introduction of our racial equity action teams. We've been meeting the racial equity action teams over the past couple of meetings, and Faith Jackson, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer. We have more folks to meet. I'm excited to hear what we're going to hear tonight. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm back for part 3 of the Missing Moment series, and so I'm really excited to be here again tonight. Like I've done in the past, I'm going to spend about 2 to 3 minutes just giving some context for what this work is and why it's important. I'll focus my attention tonight on sort of how this benefits the broad community. And so one thing that I'll note this here on this slide is that our administration and finance teams will be presenting tonight, but the racial equity teams really developed in 2020, and they're a group of volunteer staff who utilize their skills and expertise to help advance our racial equity work. On the next slide, you'll see a little bit of information about how we approach our work in the city of Bloomington. And so we prioritize an intersectional approach, which means that the work that we're doing in the Office of Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging is really looking at how can we make the experience for those folks who've been historically marginalized, whether that's based on race, gender, age, many different factors, have an equitable opportunity to engage our local government, and how do we make sure that the policies and practices and things that we do within our organization are not excluding those individuals. And so that's our approach to this racial equity work. Recognizing that we have an intersectional approach and we utilize an intersectional lens, within that we do prioritize and focus in on racial equity. And on the next slide, you'll see a little bit of reasons, some reasons to speak to why we do that. One is just because we know that sort of racism and race-based policies, practices, and procedures have been baked into government, right? And so you can see on the timeline here above that talks about sort of the history and evolution of racism in the United States, that this is something that's long going. And so it's important that we prioritize those racial equity strategies while also recognizing, right, that there are many different people and groups that have been historically marginalized. And so in the next slide, which I covered a little bit about that last week, we talked about how this work benefits the city of Bloomington as an organization. But where I want to spend my time today is really thinking about how this work benefits the community at large. And so what you see before you is a diagram that sort of speaks to the work that came out of the federal government with the ADA Inclusion Act. And so when we talk about, sometimes people ask the question, if you're prioritizing racial equity work, how does this benefit the city of Bloomington at large and everyone in our community? And so what we know is that laws that are really intentional about lifting up marginalized groups, whether that's based on people of color, people with disabilities, they tend to benefit more than just that specific group. And the ADA work, particularly this sort of work to have curb outs in our community, is a really good example of that, right? So for a really long time, we didn't have cutouts, right? And so things were really inaccessible for those who didn't have the ability to utilize that. And then it was a mandate for cities, for businesses to create these sort of create these things that would prevent barriers for people in that community. And what we realized is that many different people needed to utilize those curb cutouts. It wasn't just those who were utilizing a wheelchair. Moms who had a roller carrier, right? Like they were able to utilize them. People who had a bunch of groceries in their hand, right, could utilize them. Even skateboarders, right, could utilize those curb cutouts. And so that's just one example of that. There are some others on the slide that talk about things like voting rights. And so voting rights was sort of something that was really focused on the civil rights movement and those restrictive policies that were targeted at African American voters. But along with that, because there were poll taxes and things like that, people who were in poverty or who didn't have a lot of money to pay poll taxes were also impacted. And so when those barriers were removed, it not only made voting more accessible for members of the African American community, but other groups like poor whites. And so this is just some examples of how the work that we're doing in the Office of Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, although we do prioritize racial equity strategies, can really benefit the entire community. And so tonight we're going to hear from our Administration Racial Equity Action Team and our Finance Racial Equity Action Team. And as you listen to them present, you'll notice when they talk about the work that they're doing, that some of the things that they're doing, although they're framed through a racial equity lens, are actually impacting many different members of our community. So you'll have sort of an example of what that looks like in practice. And so I am going to start by introducing the Administration Racial Equity Action Team. And Carla, before me, she introduced her new employees. And I realized, Mike, that I don't think we've had an opportunity to introduce Padal to City Council. So I'm just going to give you a 2-for-1 and introduce. So I'm going to call up Christina, Padal, and Nancy to come and give the Administration Racial Equity Action Team presentation. And while they make their way to the podium, I just want to highlight Padal Yang, who is the Equity Inclusion Program Specialist and the newest member of the City Manager team. Padal comes to us from having worked in higher education, doing equity inclusion work for many years, and so we're really excited to have the expertise that she brings with us here in the city of Bloomington. I've heard her introduce herself a couple of times. I know she's going to do that again tonight, but one of the things that I really appreciate is that she says, I'm a mom of 2 young people, and she has a lot going on, and so if I look tired, I probably am. And so I'll stop there and let her do a little bit of introducing herself as well. We're super excited to have Padal as a member of our team, and I'm excited to have the Administration Racial Equity Action Team presenting tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, all. Welcome.
Thank you, Faith, and good evening, Mayor and council members. As Faith mentioned, my first name is Padal, last name is Yang, and I use she, her pronouns. And am I tired today? Not as I was yesterday, but the kiddos slept well tonight or last night, so that was helpful. But in addition to that, a little bit about me is that I come from a big family of 5 siblings, and I am the descendants of Hmong immigrant refugees' parents who immigrated to the U.S. due to the Vietnam War and were displaced, and so they came here to search for a better American dream. And all my siblings and I have achieved our 4-year degrees, and one of them is achieving their 2-year degree. And so we're excited that we're continuing to experience this American dream that my parents have been looking forward to. So this is really exciting. And some other fun facts is my partner and I, we love biking and we love soccer, so we're big soccer fans. We have yet to go to the Allianz soccer stadium, but we're also big on the Minnesota United team as well, too. So I'll stop there, and then I don't know if you all got a chance to introduce yourselves really quick, or...
Hello, I'm Nancy Steele with the Human Resources Department.
And I'm Christina Scippione, the city clerk.
And I think with that, we'll go ahead and present our administration racial equity action team. So you see here for the agenda today, we're just going to do some team introductions, our evolution, and the priority projects and evaluation. We'll go to the next slide. And this is the makeup of our administration team, which comprises of our city clerk, our human resources, and our city manager's office. Am I missing anyone? Okay, yeah. So those 3, and we were established, you might have to remind me.
About January.
January. So, yeah, we'll go to the next slide. And for our mission here, Administration Racial Equity Action Team was created to ensure that the Administration Department is actively working to implement the city's racial equity business plan and strategic plan. And the objective of this group is to identify small, concrete actions we take to improve racial equity outcomes in the department organization. And another benefit is that we help build camaraderie and partnership across our divisions.
Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how our admin team got brought together and some of what we've been working on so far. So we are a little bit unique as we came together for our mission being actionable items. So we determined a certain period of time that we'd be meeting. So we started in January with kind of that goal, that mission in mind, that we're going to have actionable items. And so we started as a team to do some insights, team building, getting to know each other. And then we were fortunate enough to have our very own Mike Sable help facilitate some environmental scan and brainstorming, looking at what other REITs have done, looking at the data from the city of Bloomington, looking at some of the strategic planning, and kind of all wrapped our head around some potential needs. And then we came together, what we called a mini retreat, similar to the other kind of 90-minute meetings monthly, and worked with a partner to come up with all of the different ideas. We came up with quite a few and put them on the wall kind of in categories. And what we decided to do from there is to take 2 priority action steps. And then we broke out into teams to start to work towards those 2 areas. And we'll talk a little bit about what those 2 areas are and where we are. But the future steps that we'll have is to kind of continue to report, evaluate, and then celebrate. Next slide. The next slide's a picture of some of those ideas that we were having. So we put them all on stickies on a wall to kind of put them in different categories so we can determine which action item would be most successful for us. And we came up with 2. So one of them is cultivating a culture of service and connection, and the second one is translation services. So we broke up into 2 groups, and one of them is focused on cultivating a culture of service and connection. And we thought one way that we can actionably do this is to work on drafting a community involvement policy. So this chart in front of you is a picture kind of all of our milestones. So as we determined kind of how we would make this happen in this short condensed time frame, we did some research of what other communities are doing and identified some tech solutions of how we make the process kind of go through, and then physically drafted the policy. Brought it back to the team for feedback to edit the policy, and we recently brought it to the ELT for review. It's kind of the step that we're currently on. It will do legal and risk management review next, kind of in that step, and then hopefully be able to make it happen in a short period of time.
And then the other actionable item that we're working on this year is improving our translation services, and specifically within the city clerk's office. Just outside of even election time, our office sees between 70 and 100 people a week, typically for passport services. And many of our customers that we get to interact with have limited English proficiency. And we have some tools in our toolkit for providing translated service, but they don't always work very well in the setting that we're in. They can take a lot of additional time and resources that we don't always have available for our staff right now. And so we wanted to look at how do we improve those services so that we are meeting the needs of all of our customers, specifically our passport customers when they are coming in for a vital service that we provide here at the city clerk's office. And so we're really excited about that in the city clerk's office, and looking at how can we improve specifically passports, and then look at broadening that to other services that we offer within our city.
And so with that, we decided to do some research across cities and towns and counties to ensure that the work that we're doing is intentional and thoughtful, because translation services can also be a lot of information of context and the cultural history that comes with translating. So any literal translation may not be helpful, and so we just want to make sure we do thoughtful and intentional research amongst other cities and counties before we make a decision. And so moving forward, we'll continue to do some research. We have thought about some software options, but that's still an area where we still need to do more research on what would be possible for translation services. And so with these two projects that we have in mind, we wanted to ensure that it's culturally responsive evaluation that's happening for the both of them. And so we will continue to engage in multiple stakeholders and those who are highly impacted by the intervention of what we're trying to do here. So we do plan to survey and assess those who are going to be deeply impacted by both of these projects. And throughout this process, we're going to develop questions and design solutions and recommend next steps based on the lessons that we learned from these key stakeholders.
Any questions?
Thank you. Council, questions? Councilmember Martin, then Councilmember Lohman. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for this work. This is super exciting. With the community involvement policy specifically, I know over the last year or so, we've kind of launched into a new framework with different levels of that engagement, the involve, consult, things like that. So I guess how does this policy work alongside that, and how could council anticipate using something like this policy as we're kind of getting back out in the world?
The policy is still in draft form, so it's a little hard to speak to it in too much detail, but the intent would be to have employees have the ability to do work in communities, so communities that we're partnering with potentially, or that serve the population of our Bloomington residents, so that being able to engage.
That's excellent. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. What I wanted to bring forward is I think that Faith opened the conversation really about this idea of how does this generate, or how does this impact the general population. And one of the examples that she used, I like to call it a more concrete example, is the curve cuts. See what I did there? Little groaner there, huh? And so when we look at items like the passport piece and the translation, I think that's a good example of where folks can kind of follow that logic directly to it, because here's an opportunity when you're doing passport that there is money that are gained there, unlike some of the other licenses that we were doing in the city in the past, and I won't talk about that. But I don't know if either Faith or if somebody else wanted to comment on that in terms of those were some of the things that we were looking at. But I think that's one of the things that I look for as a council member, and I think that the general public does as well, is how do these things concretely not only help direct folks who live in the city, but how they impact the city from as a whole. So I'm not sure if you want to comment on that more or anything.
Well, Mayor, Councilmember Lohman, I can share with our review of our passport services. We are an acceptance agency, so we have to follow all the federal guidelines for accepting passports. Well, even just reading our passport website in English is a little bit confusing, right? And trying to figure out what do I need for all of the documents that I have to bring with, what kind of checks do I need, where do I get a money order, all of the different things you need to know ahead of time for your passport. We've been analyzing those under the lens of how do we make that clearer for our customers with limited English proficiency, but the same goes for our customers who maybe have English as their first language, right? And making sure that in whatever language we're communicating this out and help prepping our customers for their passport appointments, that we are providing the best service possible. So it's not limited to any one particular community, but really raising up the service that we have to assist everybody and help them be more successful passport customers, and at the end have their passport applications accepted by the federal government on the first try.
Thank you. And I can speak to a little bit about the community involvement policy. Really where it came from was a focus on a connection with community and cultivating a culture of service. So really it's that focus on service and connection with our community. That's really the premise of it. We thought it aligned very well with the Bloomington Together Tomorrow strategy. So when we kind of looked at those, it was one that pulled up kind of to the top because it aligns so much with the core values of the city. So specifically building trusting relationships that acknowledge diversity and embody our values. That's really where we landed there. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the work that you're doing and looking at it from a broad sense. And I appreciate your comments, Christina, the fact that, yes, the passport application is difficult enough, and I can't imagine if English is not your first language or if you're trying to navigate that. And but at the same time, it's also tough for English speakers as well. So the work that you're doing to make this clear and to make Bloomington City services more accessible and more user-friendly is greatly appreciated. So thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you. Thanks.
Thank you.
We're applauding.
It's okay to clap. And now we're going to have the Finance Racial Equity Action Team present to you. We have with us Maureen O'Brien and Dana Chow.
Good evening and welcome.
Good evening. I am Dana Chow. I'm the purchasing agent for the city, and I'm here on behalf of the Finance Racial Equity Action Team.
Dana, could I ask you to get into the microphone a little bit?
Yes.
So we can hear a little bit better? Thank you.
There you go. So at the inception of our group, we came up with 4 main objectives: growth and learning opportunities for our department, identifying how the finance department connects with the BIPOC community, because we're an internal service, just that portion of it has been good work for us. Also offering language assistance. We have begun translating some of the assessment documents and things like that into other languages. But our largest undertaking has been the equitable contracting micro business. And as you may recall, we came to you earlier in the year and asked for some strategic priorities funding to help move forward this initiative through a partnership with Strong and Starlight Consulting. And so I'm here with Maureen O'Brien this evening from Legal to give you guys an update on where that process is at.
This is the introduction slide explaining that, yes, I'm here, Maureen O'Brien from the legal department. You may have heard a small update about the equitable contracting and microbusiness when legal presented to you, but we thought we'd do sort of a more in-depth presentation here together. So we can move on to the next slide. This shows sort of some of the elements of the strategy that went into implementing that microbusiness, but big picture what we're doing is collaborating with the staff to determine where there may be opportunities to streamline some of the existing processes and improve some of our existing systems while we're building a new program. This work will build on the city's commitment to racial equity and equitable economic growth by increasing access and becoming more inclusive in our contracting and procurement policies. Next slide. So why are we working on this project? First, it aligns, so the concept of equitable contracting aligns with the city's core values, strategic objectives, and it has commercial advantages. So coming out of the Bloomington Tomorrow Together strategic plan, we know that there are core values of when diversity is embraced, the community is strengthened, and that everyone benefits when there is equitable access to opportunity. In addition, the strategic objective is that the city will achieve significant improvement in indices measuring equitable economic growth. In addition, there are commercial advantages, right? Some studies have shown that inclusive procurement strategy will widen your pool of potential suppliers and promote competition in the supply base, which can improve product quality and drive down costs. In addition, by providing more sourcing options, inclusiveness can make your supply chain more resilient and agile. And in addition, studies have shown that supplier diversity programs can be a selling point when hiring. Next slide. And in addition, this responds to an opportunity that we're seeing in Bloomington. So you may have seen a version of this slide before. This talks about the demographic shift in our city. While the overall population of Bloomington has not changed a whole lot since 1970, the demographics of the population have shifted, right? So in 1970, only around 1% of our community was a member of the BIPOC community. But now in 2020, it's more than 30%. Similarly, on the national level, what we're seeing is a shifting demographics in business ownership. So women and minority-owned business enterprises have been growing at approximately 4.5 times the rate of the population growth overall. Similarly, Latinx-owned businesses have been growing at a rate of 2 to 4 times the rate of overall population growth. So in short, this is an opportunity for us to evaluate if our existing practices are adequately connecting with the vendors and the businesses that exist in our changing marketplace. And if not, it's an opportunity to make those connections.
So what is our goal here? Our goal here is to encourage local, small, minority-owned, women-owned, and underutilized businesses to engage with the city. We plan on doing that by removing barriers and making connections. The first step to doing that will be to remove barriers and making connections within those business communities. We're looking to spend more city dollars within those communities. You may be familiar with this graphic as well. It points out to the different employment sectors in Bloomington. You'll notice that professional and business services is the largest employment sector in Bloomington. That is also where we spend a great deal of city dollars. So there's definitely some untapped potential here to direct more of our city spend to those services. Next slide. So where are we at? We came to you for some money in the spring. We then engaged with Strong and Starlike. We've done some information gathering. We're doing listening sessions with employees. We are going to be doing a listening session with ELT at the beginning of August. Today, a supplier survey went out to all the email addresses of every supplier we have in our database. A staff survey also went out. So staff have had multiple opportunities to have input, and now businesses that we do business with will have the opportunity to have input on this process and how it's developed. We're really looking for feedback on the front end before we present a final proposal. Just based on today's supplier survey, I've received 2 responses. One says, "This is the first I've heard anything about Bloomington reaching out to small businesses. I hope this starts something good." And the other email I received said, "Thank you for starting this initiative." So already we're getting positive feedback from the business community. Next slide. We are also getting, which ties in with the feedback that we're getting from staff as well. Staff are really asking for a tool that would allow them to search for vendors in this section of small, women, minority, local-owned businesses, and we don't have that right now. So this also brings us to the need to measure how we're doing, going back to our strategic objective of being able to have a measurable impact. Right now, we don't have the ability to measure where we're at, so we don't have the ability to measure where we need to be or where we're going. So that will be one of the things that comes in the future, is how we're going to do that, the tools and resources that will be required to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Council, questions, comments? Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thank you very much for doing the work. Really appreciate this. This is exciting. I think I got the opportunity to listen to Mayor Carter of St. Paul not that long ago, and one of the things he mentioned was there's a real, always one of the things that you can do is to make sure that you're creating vibrancy within the community of people and resources that you have. Lots of people think about, I think the way he put it was, you think of the people who live here or the things that are here as the burden, and all the new stuff comes from outside. And he's like rejecting that idea and saying, actually, there's a lot right here that we can use. And so I'm really excited that you're tapping into that, and I'm looking forward to hearing how you're doing with that. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Also, anything else? Well, thanks for your work with this. And looking at it, I appreciate the vision of this from an equity standpoint also, but also from a business standpoint, that this makes sense from a financial, a taxpayer standpoint. And I appreciate your taking the opportunity to bring that forward and to look at opportunities for us to become more financially competitive. So well done. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Item 3 on our agenda is our consent business. And Councilmember Martin has our consent business tonight. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. As of now, I have heard about holds on 3.1 from Councilmember Nelson, 3.5, and from Councilmember Coulter, 3.10. Any others? Councilmember Lohman?
Yeah, if we could hold 3.2. Apologize, I didn't get a chance to grab that one from you earlier.
All right, 3.2 as well. Any others? Okay. With that, I will move approval of items 3.3 and 4, and 3.6 through 3.9, as well as 3.11.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Martin, second by Councilmember Coulter to approve tonight's consent business as stated. No further council discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. Councilmember Martin, let's hold item 3.1 and then just go chronologically. How about that? It's,
sounds good.
Numerically, I guess. It would be not numerically. Item 3.2, Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you. So I wanted to make sure that the general public did not miss this one, because this is going to be part of the conversation that we're going to have later on this evening. This is the resolution for budget adjustment to transfer general fund positive budget variance. And I don't know if staff wanted to just mention something a little bit about this, just so that the general public understood what we're doing with this here.
Mr. Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Councilmember Lohman, each year when we get through our audit and we have the full picture of what our prior year's financials settled at, we usually come to the council and ask for positive budget variance, which is what we call the overage in each year, that be reallocated, and typically that goes towards the strategic priorities fund. That has ranged from year to year. Some years it's been as low as $500,000 or $1 million. Some years it's been relatively high. This is a high year. And I do want to point out why it is that $6 million of overage from 2021 is the number, because I think people will look at that and potentially say, wow, you overtaxed us at $6 million, right? And the fact is that this positive budget variance is a cumulative amount from the past couple years due to the federal relief, the COVID response CARES dollars that came to the city in 2020. That was a $7 million allocation. It's different from the $11 million ARP funds. That was a subsequent allocation. Those dollars have all been allocated to projects. Okay, so the CARES funds weren't specifically allocated, and they were to help local governments manage through the uncertainty related to the pandemic in 2020. We had higher than anticipated lodging and admission tax revenue in 2021. We had higher than anticipated permit revenues in 2021. We had lower than budgeted expenses in both 20 and 21. Council will recall that in 2020 we made significant reductions in our budget, and we controlled our spending in 2021 as well. We didn't transfer as much out of the general fund of the strategic priorities, or to the strategic priorities at the end of 2020. We had that significant overage from the CARES dollars, but we wanted to leave it in there for reserves just in case there continued to be volatility as a result of how the pandemic played out. I think we're confident right now that the volatility has settled from the environment, at least the financial environment, and we're comfortable at this time moving those funds into the Strategic Priorities Fund. Does that help answer the question, Councilmember Bowman?
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and City Manager. I appreciate, because that was the very question that I had when I first saw this transfer is, from a taxpayer's perspective, which I shared with you earlier, that concern that how this looks in terms of clarifying that. And so understanding that we held those dollars back out of prudence and, with our ongoing philosophy of a more conservative fiscal planning, that makes good sense here. And so I think it makes sense, and it was very clear here. If there isn't any other questions, I'd be happy to move this.
Before you do so, Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick follow-up, because something was sort of sparked. Because I think, to Councilmember Lohman's point, another logical follow-up question would be, why not just give it back to the taxpayers? And I think it's worth explaining that, in essence, cities can't really do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Councilmember Coulter, that is correct. There is no statutory or constitutional authority that allows local governments to rebate money back to taxpayers. That's not an option that is available to us. I think a similar and second question may be, well, why don't you just use that money to reduce the taxes for the coming budget year? And the reason that we don't do that is because it would create a structural imbalance in our budget because we have generally ongoing expenses and obligations as part of our service delivery. And then we would have to come back in a subsequent year and just levy back those dollars anyway. So it would create a pretty significant yo-yoing, that's a technical term, in how the levy number works from year to year. So what we'll be doing later in the meeting is discussing some recommendations for where we can apply dollars from the Strategic Priorities Fund that are one-time expenditures that don't have tails in our budget or create future obligations.
Clear, Councilmember? Yep. All right. Council, any additional questions regarding this? If not, Councilmember Lohman?
Mayor, I'd be happy to move a motion to approve the budget transfer resolution to move $6.3 million from the 101 General Fund to the following fund, 4200 Strategic Priorities.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Lohman, second by Councilmember Martin, to accept item 3.2 in tonight's consent business. No further council discussion on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Item 3.5, I'm sorry, I missed, was that Councilmember Nelson? Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to just ask a question, not about this, but about the concept of it. I know we've talked in the past about looking at ways to ensure that gambling revenues stay within and benefit the city of Bloomington. And obviously, St. Thomas Academy is a great place, and a lot of great people have gone there, and kids have gone there, but it's not in Bloomington. So just wondering where we're at on that.
And just for the folks at home watching, this is item 3.5, and it's a resolution for a gambling premise permit at Mallards Restaurant by St. Thomas Academy. So, Mr. Verbrugier, and I see Mr. Junker on our screen as well.
Go ahead, Doug.
Mr. Junker?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. where we're at on this. We'll be back on August 15th to discuss some different options with you. And I know one of your concerns is this is a non-Bloomington organization. I did have a chance to talk with David, the owner of Mallards, to get his approval and make sure that everything, that this was legit and everything. But he did tell me he did reach out to a couple local organizations, and they just felt they couldn't take on this extra site. So part of the deal with St. Thomas is it fills a dual niche for him. They're going to be working their the Inver Grove Mallards and our Mallards. So he kind of did a deal with them, but he did reach out locally. He told me to a couple here. So, we'll be back on the 15th to discuss some other options and some other ideas with you.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the information. So, and then again, good organization, good school. So,
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to the conversation on the 15th. And as part of that conversation, I mean, is the acknowledgement that taking on a gambling premise permit is a big obligation. It's a huge responsibility. And so to Mr. Junker's point that if the folks at Mallards went to a couple of local organizations and they simply weren't able to do it, that doesn't surprise me at all because it is a big obligation to have somebody in the gambling operation. The gambling operation is tricky, and to have someone sitting there selling the pull tabs during the hours of operation that you need to do so. So it's a big deal. So we'll have that conversation a little bit more.
And Mr. Mayor, if I can just add, I appreciate Councilmember Nelson's question because I'm sure that other residents are wondering about that too, is why we can't limit gambling operations revenues from staying in the city of Bloomington. And there's a statutory requirement about a trade area, and the trade area includes all cities that are contiguous to the city of Bloomington. So, we can certainly have some restrictions, but we also have to be cognizant of state law.
and I appreciate staff work to bring that forward. I know several people have asked us about it. So,
Yes, they have.
Looking forward to that conversation. If there's anything else, I'd move item 3.5.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Nelson, second by Councilmember Martin to move to accept item 3.5 on the consent business. No further council discussion on this one. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. Item 3.10, Councilmember Coulter.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief one here. Just wanted to note for folks that we are amending our city council meeting calendars. We will not be having a meeting next Monday, July 25th. So I'm afraid you're gonna have to, find something else to occupy your time on Monday night. But I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that. I know, folks like to go to the listening session and all of that, and just wanted to make sure that folks knew that we will not be meeting next Monday. So, I guess you can show up here, but I'm not gonna be here, so I don't know what to tell you about that. So with that, unless there's any further comment on that, I will move to approve the attached resolution amending the 2022 meeting schedule of the City Council.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Coulter, second by Councilmember Martin on item 3.10 on the consent business, amending our 2022 City Council meeting schedule. No further council discussion on this one. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. Now we'll double back up to item 3.1, our donations. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. Quite a lot of them. Thank you so much to all the generous folks across Bloomington that supported our natural environment, our programs, 9 Mile Brewing, the Isaac Walton League, helping with some natural area restoration work, a couple of trees donated to Dwan, all kinds of donations to the Creekside Quilters and everybody that's supporting the programs over there. A lot of contributions to the police department, in particular, the police department's youth programs in memory of retired officer Ken Miller. Thank you to everybody that supported that. And all kinds of contributions from area nonprofit organizations and churches and businesses to the Pride celebration coming up. So a huge thank you to everybody that contributed, the folks that are sponsoring, and I'm sure there'll be signage at the event so folks can say thanks to all those folks as well. So with all that being said, I will move that we adopt a resolution accepting these donations.
Second?
Motion by Councilmember Martin, second by Councilmember D'Alessandro to approve item 3.1, the donations. And of course, staff will send out the requisite thank you notes to all the folks who have made donations to our city. Thank you very much to all of them. No further council discussion on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. Thank you, Councilmember Martin. We will move on to item 4 on our agenda, is our hearings, resolutions, and ordinances. And as you know, we had moved item 4.2 up in the agenda, so we are done with that. But item 4.1 is a public hearing for a vacation of a public scenic easement at 7981 Leah Circle. Mr. Keel is here to lead us through that and to maybe explain to us why it's 110 degrees in here as well. It's,
Thank you, Mayor. It is hot in here, and I think that the system was shocked by the number of people that came early. It is slowly getting cooler. So I did check, and the system is running, but it takes a significant amount of time for it to sort of react and to change the volume of air that's in this.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Keel.
That had nothing to do with item 4.1.
Item 4.1.
Yes. So the council may recall that in May you had a hearing regarding a number of conditions at the property on Lee Circle, and you had removed a number of those original conditions, one of which was the requirement for a scenic easement. And so subsequent to that, the property owner has asked that that easement be vacated. It's no longer a condition of that approval, so it is consistent with the actions that the council took in May. So with that, we are recommending approval of the vacation of this easement.
Council questions of Mr. Keel? Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thanks. Hey, Mr. Keel. Good to see you. Can you explain the vacation of the easement? Is that a permanent thing that transfers with the property on a going forward basis? So, 50 years from now, if the house is sold, et cetera, help people understand what vacation means versus removing the condition on the permit itself.
Yes, so
Thank you.
the actual easement is a legal document that is filed at the county that runs with the property. So it becomes part of the deed or attached to the deed for the property. So this easement would run with the property in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
So vacating this easement means we take it off there and it is no longer attached to the property.
Okay. And that sounds pretty much like a more procedural thing than anything, considering that it's not a condition of the property itself.
It's not a condition any longer of the approval of that property when it was developed. You removed that condition in May.
Okay.
So it's
Right.
no longer required by the city.
Okay. One final question, if I may, Mr. Mayor. Of that easement, how much of that property, looking at the picture, is all of that property that is in question in that section of the picture considered the property of the homeowner, or is some of that portion that actual public section that is down there by the road?
All of the easement that's being vacated is located on the private property, on the
Okay.
homeowner's property. It's adjacent to the right-of-way for Lee Road, but it is actually over a portion of private property.
And how much of the right-of-way is still there?
All of the right-of-way is.
All the right-of-ways are. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember. And to clarify that, this isn't as though the city is giving this property to this property owner, to this landowner. This is part of the property that they own, that the city had an easement on for a number of years, and now is removing that easement. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Councilmember Lohman?
So then, just so I'm clear that once we remove this, there really isn't a way, well, we've kind of already removed it anyways, but to really kind of enforce anything here with respect to any wooding and that kind of thing at all. But it only impacts this property and no other property that has that scenic easement.
That is correct. So to be clear, there are other provisions in the code that protect some areas, slopes, and those types of areas. Those changes are still applied to this property, but kind of the special conditions within this area right adjacent to Lee Road are no longer in force if you approve this item.
Clear? Good. Council, additional questions? Hearing none, this is a public hearing, and I will open this public hearing now. A public hearing regarding a vacation of a public scenic easement at 7981 Lee Circle. Is there anyone here in the council chambers who wishes to speak on item 4.1 this evening? Please come forward now. Good. No one coming forward. Do we have anyone on the phone?
Mr. Mayor, council members, no one on the phone.
Last call for anyone in the council chambers? Seeing no one coming forward, council, I would look for a motion to close the public hearing on item 4.1.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember D'Alessandro, second by Councilmember Lohman to close the public hearing on item 4.1. No further council discussion on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 6-0. Council, any additional questions or discussion regarding this action before us this evening? Councilmember Lohman.
Mayor, I'll be clear. I think when this first came through, I didn't support this because I wanted to see a more general solution for this, understanding this just came as one item, so I will not be supporting this particular procedural movement.
Council, anything else? Any other questions, comments? If not, Council, I'd look for action on item 4.2 or 4.1.
I'll make that motion.
Councilmember D'Alessandro.
I move that in the interest of the public to adopt an ordinance approving the vacation of a public scenic easement over and across Lot 1, Block 1, Lee Woods, in accordance, according to the recorded plat thereof, Hennepin County, Minnesota.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember D'Alessandro, second by Councilmember Martin, to adopt an ordinance approving the vacation of a public scenic easement as described in the motion. No further council discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-1 with Councilmember Lohman in opposition. Thank you. Very good. We will move on to item 5 on our agenda now. That's our organizational business. And our first thing up on item 5 is item 5.1. Here it is. It's facilities maintenance service evaluation follow-up. John Bradford, our maintenance superintendent, is here. Good evening, Mr. Bradford. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. Pleasure to be here again. It is warm in here. I checked on it as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
As you may recall, about a month ago, we were here talking about the facilities services assessment done by FEA, and they had several recommendations, which I'll summarize going forward. The first significant finding was that with our 8 employees, we are operating between a benchmark level 4 and a benchmark level 3, which is somewhere between reactive management and managed care. One of the things that the consultant said is that we're essentially getting what we're paying for. The troops are working hard, they're performing good service, but we need to make a larger investment in order to get to this managed care and maximize the life of our facilities. They had 4 key recommendations, the first being to create a position and hire an assistant superintendent for facilities management. This is already underway. We have the position description. We're ready to go out and search for this position. It's in the 2022 budget currently. The second was to add 4 maintenance positions to move us to that level 3 level of staffing. And they also recommended adding up to 5 more positions if the city desired to achieve higher service levels. The last 2 recommendations were to create a building attendant position for this building in Civic Plaza to handle a lot of the non-maintenance duties, do the QA, QC on our custodial services, handle and coordinate the room setups that we do. The consultant and staff both see this as a critical add. And then the other piece of it is to deal with how do we fund and charge out our maintenance services. We have a space and occupancy model that we use. We work individually with our enterprise funds, BIG and Dwan and the fire stations, and to make a comprehensive review of all of those systems and come up with something that will work for the city. So since that meeting, we have put together an implementation plan. In 2022, it includes hiring the facilities manager, which we are in process of doing. For the 2023 budget request, we have in there hiring the building attendant and 1 service technician. We felt that it was prudent to space that service technician recommendation over time. And we're recommending hiring 1 a year over the next 4 years. And when we get the new facilities manager on board, have that person look at where we're at and what our needs are as we move forward. So taking a measured approach to that recommendation. Also in 2023, we want to establish the new space and occupancy chargeback system, establish service levels with our enterprise funds, and make that system a lot more transparent and clear. And then in the years 2024 and 2026, hire one service technician in each of those years to bring us to that total of 4 over the 4 years. This is the maintenance fund long-term model. So this shows our entire facilities fund. The important piece of this is the green line that's our total working capital balance. We have a goal that is the bottom line of the chart. We are currently surpassing that. We've been saving up money for the pool vessel out at the Aquatic Center, and that comes due after 2028, so we'll see a significant reduction in that balance when that project comes forward. But this gives you an idea of, with the programmed pieces in this model, that financially we're feeling stable. With that, I would open it up for any questions and discussion the council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Appreciate that, and appreciate the notion of a measured approach to implement and hire over a period of years. I think that makes good sense, especially as things continue to change. It allows you to adjust and consider where the new hires, the new people might be best put to work and best worked in there. In the study that was done and the recommendations that were made, was there any look at the cost saving offset to this? I know full well that maintenance saves money down the road somewhere. And was there any look at that to have additional people on board doing replacing the fan belt before it breaks, which makes incredible sense, what that savings would be, and is there any way to quantify that or put that all together?
Not in a quantifiable way. I think we can all think of projects that we had to do faster than we needed to, faster than we wanted to, because they broke, and that those items cost the city more money. But quantifying how much it saves us over time is really difficult. I always think of this position as the fleet manager of facilities, and I think about the amount of money that Mr. Keim has saved us by optimizing the systems in our fleet and looking at things with a new lens and sort of professionalizing that entire body of work has really paid dividends for the city. And my gut tells me we're going to see the same sorts of things with this.
I would agree. My gut tells me the same thing. And I think the other way to look at that, perhaps not what might be saved in the future, but what being understaffed or being at the level 3 staffing or 2 or whatever we're at now, what has that cost us in the past?
Right.
What has that, the staffing to not be able to change that fan belt, what does that cost us overall in the past?
Right.
So, council, questions or thoughts on this? Councilmember D'Alessandro?
Would you mind, Mr. Sable, putting the slide back up again that included the recommendations, specifically, go forward one again? It was, go ahead, forward, back to the beginning, or back to the end, I'm sorry. Does that make sense? Back to the end? Here, that right here is perfect. So this new space and occupancy chargeback system, I was kind of hoping that you could elaborate on that a little bit. Sure. I assumed, I didn't want to assume that it was similar to kind of the way that we do IT services here.
It is.
It is, okay.
Yes,
very
it
good.
is.
Is that being done then at a per person level, like they are doing it in IT, or is it going to be more like a space equivalent?
Currently, it's very complex, and I'm sure it won't get any simpler. But it's based on square footage.
Okay.
And what makes it complex is that we have buildings that aren't in the space and occupancy model. And so there are charges that go to those those folks as we do services for them. And then the fire department is under a slightly different model, and because we do partial services there. A lot of the firefighters do some of the work in the buildings, and we do some of the work in the buildings. And so it's a whole mishmash of different ways that we do it. And I'm not sure that having all of these different ways is in the best interest of the city over the long term.
So there's a standardizing that's going to happen as part of this.
Right.
Okay, thanks. Look forward to seeing that. Second question, how will we know when we've reached level 3? Like, what are the consultants telling us are the data points that we can measure against to say, we've achieved that objective?
Well, council member, that's a terrific question, because one of the things is developing the key performance measures to actually measure our work. And that's part of this first stage, is to develop what those metrics are. But it's about a ratio of how many reactive calls do we get versus how many preventive maintenance items are we doing. And that ratio is one of the things that we do. And there's about 5 other metrics that fold into that tell us about where we're at on that scale.
And that would be, that process is being developed as I'm assuming this facilities manager that we hire and so on and so
Right.
forth be a big part of that as well.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few quick questions. On that budget slide that you had, was that the budget assuming the implementation of these over the few years, so that you're still in a positive?
It was, council member.
Okay. I just want to clarify that. One of the changes that you're looking at is having an individual take care of Civic Plaza and all of that. I think to your point of a mismatch of different service models, the fire department's different than Civic Plaza, is different than Big, all of that. What is the process you're looking at, for lack of a better term, rationalizing that? And did the consultant make any recommendations about how to do that, which model may work best, be most efficient and cost effective for taxpayers, that sort of thing?
Mr. Mayor, council member, he did not make any specific recommendations on what model to use for that.
Okay.
There very well could be a second study to assist with us putting this together.
Okay.
But at this point, we want to get the facilities manager on board and have those conversations about which way to move forward.
Okay. And I could see that might be part of the responsibility of that individual. And I'm also, I appreciate the question the mayor asked with regards to the payback, because that's where I'm most struggling with this plan. I mean, I understand the example. I own a remodeling company. I get maintenance, and that sort of thing. But when we do like the pavement management program, they have a chart that says it extends the life for this many years. So here's the long-term cost of this roadway before we have to replace it, and it's less expensive under their model, at least from
Right.
what they tell us every year when we approve it. So, but it seems to make sense. I would love to see at least an attempt, an approximation to say, hey, if we do this, we're going to have these types of outcomes. Because I see facilities, and I hear this a lot from people, like, why didn't you maintain Creekside?
Yep.
Now it's in a condition that is not what we'd want it to be, and now we're looking at significant expense for replacement of that facility. So I get the concept. I would love to see more concrete numbers, even if we know that they're not accurate. But we have a CIP. We're projecting out when things are going to need to have major improvements and replacements. If we do all of this spending in today's dollars, what does that impact in future dollars? And for me, on that level of stuff, it's a cost benefit analysis. Does it make sense to spend the money today? Do we save enough in the future? Otherwise, just get the call that it broke and go fix it.
Right. Mr. Mayor, council member, I think that's a terrific lens and a great question. I sort of view this in a very PMP style fashion as well. And we're at that stage where we know we need a PMP. We have a lot of good data about our systems, and we've got a really good CIP. What we're missing is the technical know-how to merge all of that into a full comprehensive PMP. And those are exactly the kind of things that I'm expecting this person to be able to develop over time.
So it seems like part of the plan and part of that first person that we're bringing in to help us get that stuff. So
Yep.
this council or future councils will have that data.
Yep.
Good.
One moment, Councilmember Loman. I just want to add on to that. I agree with you completely, Councilmember, the need to actually quantify this and to look at this. The one thing that I consider as I think of this and look at this, I look at the facilities condition assessment that we have seen, and the number of Bloomington buildings that are in the red is appalling. And it's all part of, and I know for years the goal of the council and the goal of city management was to keep property taxes as low as possible. We've talked about this in the past, and they did a very good job of it, and it served Bloomington very well for a number of years. But now we're seeing some of the ramifications of it, that the investments that we need in our fire stations, the investments that we need in Bloomington Ice Garden, you mentioned Creekside, and not only the facilities themselves, but the people to care for those facilities as well. So if we can work forward with this and make sure that 10, 15, 20 years down the line, the council isn't looking at a facilities condition assessment of the buildings across the city of Bloomington and seeing a bunch of red, I would say that we've done well for ourselves. We've done well for this community, because that's what financial stewardship, that's what the stewardship of our buildings, the structures that we have is an important role that we play, and we've got to keep that in mind, I think. So agree completely, though. Councilmember Lohman.
Well, Mayor, I was just going to compliment you and my other colleagues too about that question that you asked, because that's exactly where I'm struggling with, is the value piece of trying to make sense of this. And it's kind of unfair to kind of throw this in front of us and say, hey, solve this all at one time. But I do think that the public does, because I think that's one of the things that we struggle with as we kind of do a paradigm shift here. When we look at our capital deficiencies that are within our facilities, and that's not sometimes easy to see. Other times it's very easy to see. We had a person that came to talk to us last week about one of the deficiencies with one of our facilities that are out there. So there's a cost that's associated with that, and I think that as we try to make the case to our residents, every way in which that we can, in a sense, Mayor, you're in communications, tell that story, to the general public and really kind of lay that out. I think it makes it a lot easier to kind of get that point across, because I do think that this is incredibly important. And then as we go back to our voters and say, well, we got inflation, we've got these number of things going on. Now I also need a little extra to help with these facilities. I think, laying that out, and I'm sure, I have confidence that we'll figure out a way to do that. But my question I have for you beyond that, since that's been kind of sufficiently destroyed, is I wanted to go back to that budget piece that we had up there. And a lot of folks don't get a chance to look at our funding piece. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about those working capital pieces that are there on the bottom. And then you see that percentage that's up there,
Yep.
The 186, and just talk about what what that working capital goal means, and what we have to statutorily do, or within if we want to be a city with the financial underpinnings that we have, what we need to kind of do from that perspective, and what this means, as you're looking at that, if that's a fair question to ask.
Sure.
I even know we're not in budget time, but when people see these numbers here and they see all green, go ahead.
Sure thing.
Bradford,
Mr.
give us a
Mayor,
quick rundown on this, because you're right. We can get into this a lot more in our budget discussions in the coming weeks. So,
Councilmember, the quick answer is the green means that we are at or above our working capital fund balance goal. So the goal is established to pay for projects in the following year, to have enough money in the bank to pay for an emergency, to cover expenses while basically while taxes come in and the payments are made from the various departments into the fund. One of the things that is being done with this fund is it's a storage keeper for projects like the Aquatic Center, where every year we have put some money into this, and then I believe it is now 2030 or 2031 is the pool vessel project where a lot of this money comes out. As you can see in the percentages in 2020, it was 186% of the goal, and that's steadily decreasing. And when we get out to 2030, we're in the yellow, possibly the red, as we look at these things. And so we'll need to continue to watch these funds very closely. But that's why the balance is so much higher than the goal, is because we're saving up money for a project so we can earn the interest on it instead of bonding and paying interest on it, which really helps the city.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just think that's so important that when we kind of take this snapshot or slice of our financial puzzle, that it's important that we keep in mind that for other folks who are not necessarily looking at this, they may not understand we've got a CIP, we've got strategic priorities, and we've got a lot of other things that are kind of shaking their hands as we kind of go through this. And sometimes when you look at this, you can get a certain impression. I know that I did when I had a chance to look at this from home, because I'm not here every night listening to what the council's doing. So I just want to be sure that I kind of give a little peek behind that door of the budget. I don't want to go any further than that, because we're going to have a conversation about this later on, but I wanted to make sure if you're looking at this, remember there are other documents that we as a council look at that drive some of these numbers that are under here that you don't necessarily see.
Now, this item was for discussion, correct?
Yes.
Which we have done, no action on this, but now that our discussion is going to, I'm sure, mold what happens as we move forward. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Very good. Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Just a couple of quick recommendations, if that's okay. Number one for us, I guess, there is an example of some facility metrics that was indicated in the report that the consultants gave us. If a scorecard like this could actually be developed, I think that would be great, and I think it would maybe answer some of our, not only our SLA questions, but also our budgetary questions. There's some trends up and downs in terms of cost-benefit analysis and everything, so as you think about that. And then I guess the second question would be, if we're not being explicit, I think we should be explicit in our job description that we're expecting this facility person to do this work, because it seems like I don't want to call it a specific or a niche skill set, but there's some analytical components to this that lots of people have done great facilities maintenance work and maybe haven't had the requirement to do this kind of cost benefit analysis. So I just throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member.
Yeah,
Thanks, Council Member. Mr. Bradford, thanks much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Item 5.2 on our agenda is the recommendations regarding our strategic priorities fund project. Mr. Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. This is a little bit of a carry-on conversation that was prefaced during the consent agenda. The action that's being requested of the council tonight is to authorize roughly $3.5 million from the Strategic Priorities Fund for various one-time projects that will benefit the community and the operations of the city. Again, I want to state that these are one-time expenditures. They do not have ongoing obligations associated with them. When working with the executive leadership team to identify potential projects to put in front of the council for consideration, we focused first on projects that were consistent with the strategic plan and also with some of the commitments that council has been making recently, especially like the Park System Master Plan, and also understanding what existing or what current issues seem to be taking a little bit more prominence in the community. Public safety is one of those issues that rose to the top of the list as well. On that public safety front, council is aware, folks who are watching may not be, that we did make some commitments a couple months ago related to fire. And so there was a conversation about requests related to the police department as well. In all of the requests, there were several that were not just one time. There were several requests for staff, and what I'm presenting to you tonight is not bringing those forward because we're very close to the budget season at this point in time, and I didn't want to put something in front of the council that was basically going to lock in place a decision before we get to the budget process and have a chance to talk about them. So the projects that are in front of you for consideration, I would put into three primary buckets. One is for the police department, a number of investments that will tend to some, I'd say long-standing issues that haven't, not long-standing, but they're timely. Things that maybe on this topic of facilities maintenance that maybe not have been attended to in several years. And also some things that will make the operations of the department better, and I'll detail those in a moment. Parks and Recreation, significant, what I would describe as a down payment on the commitment we made with the Park System Master Plan that was recently adopted by the City Council. And I'll talk about some of those projects. And then coming out of the Public Works Department, we have, I think, commitment to our sustainability initiatives that's consistent with what the council has been talking about as desired activity, and then we have some other service issues in there that I'll detail. So let me go back to the police department first. There are 4 projects that we're proposing to fund. Council did a walkthrough of the jail and saw the current condition of the jail. There's a remodel project for the jail that is necessary given the condition of that area. That's about $175,000. There's also a remodel for the gym. The gym is very heavily used by our police officers. It's not exclusively used by our police officers, so their city employees also use the gym. That's about a $100,000 project. That project could have utilized funds from one of our forfeiture funds. That would have been an eligible expense. The forfeiture fund goes to fund other special expenditures within the police department and sometimes legal, and I thought it was more appropriate to reserve those funds there because otherwise we end up paying for them through the police budget too. And because this is more of a city general fund, and because the gym is utilized by more than police officers, I felt this was the more appropriate route to go for the gym remodel. A body scanner for the jail of about $140,000. This will enhance safety for processing our customers, and also provides for some additional respect and dignity for people who are being processed through the jail, especially related to gender issues and religious issues. The body scanner will help respect some of those issues as well. And then finally, the shared values organization development process. Chief Hodges is leading with the respect-based approach for law enforcement, for the police officers, how we treat each other and how we treat our constituents. And this shared values process is intended to advance that culture throughout the whole department, and that will unfold over a couple of years' time. In the Parks and Recreation Department, 3 primary focus areas, and I did want to say that with these investments, really trying to show impact as soon as possible. So I'm going to start with the third item that's in your agenda memo, and that's the park improvements, the upgrades. These are all projects that I believe we will be able to mobilize our staff and complete yet this year. So before the end of fall, our residents will see meaningful investment in the parks. It includes upgrades for basketball courts in Cedar Crest, Dred Scott, Smith, and Valley View parks. That includes court resurfacing, new hoops and backgrounds, and seating in those areas. We plan to redeck 10 bridges with treated oak in Central, Highland, and Normandale Lake parks. We're going to add into several parks a recreation amenity that people identified during our Park System Master Plan. That's bag toss. We don't call it cornhole around here. It's bag toss because we're in Minnesota. And we're going to do that at Bush Lake and Moore and Normandale Lake and Valley View parks. And I do want to make a note so folks aren't surprised. The Valley View horseshoe, I did not just say that on TV. Did I just say that on TV? Well done. Somebody save the tape on that.
Show of hands, who heard that? Everybody heard that? That's what, yeah.
The Valley View Horseshoe Pit will be reduced in size to accommodate the bag toss. You stop it. I got to get my mojo back here. And then at various parks throughout the system, just making some aesthetic improvements by adding concrete surfaces for the biffs and picnic tables and trash carts. So those are all improvements that we'll see through the system yet this year. And then there are two larger expenditures that will be done in 2023. One is Smith Park playground replacement. That project was already identified in our CIP for 2023. We had originally planned to do that with charter bonds. We're not going to be issuing charter bonds in 23 for park projects because we're working through the planning of 8 or 9 parks for the system plan that we intend to do in 2024. We wanted to make sure that we stay on track with the project in 23, and so this allows us to do that with the replacement of the playground at Smith Park. And then for the Bloomington Family Aquatic Center, $700,000 for a new pool filter, and that includes ultraviolet disinfection. So that's a significant upgrade to that facility. And then we have just some other improvements like rekeying of park buildings to enhance security and replacement of a gazebo roof at Normandale Lake Park. And then finally, in Public Works, I mentioned the sustainability first and foremost. We're proposing to purchase 10 electric F-150 vehicles. The council is aware that through our sustainability initiatives, the two biggest areas where we will make progress in our pursuit of our reduction goals is in the area of fleets and vehicles and building energy. And that's not just city operations, but that's citywide. So what we can do as a city is to start working on our fleet and transitioning that. This is a down payment to doing that, $350,000 to buy 10 new electric vehicles. Also a study for EV charging stations to be placed throughout the community, and having that study in place will set the stage for us to pursue future grant opportunities and have an implementation plan ready to go at the point that we are ready to do that. So as the continuation of electric vehicles takes a greater hold in the marketplace, we'll have more opportunity within the community for people to avail themselves of that. We have a couple of projects here that are addressing issues that the council has brought up that tend to be livability issues. So the active transportation study, and this will be updating or replacing what we currently have in place called our alternative transportation plan. This is going to address mobility and accessibility throughout Bloomington, how people move around. And then a speed limit study to address concerns of safety and livability in neighborhoods. I think council probably hears frequently that folks would like people to slow down in their neighborhoods. And so this is the process for moving that analysis of options forward. And then we do have a workspace study for engineering and fleet. That area has seen more bodies added over the last 20 years and not much space accommodation provided for them. And so this is going to look at some options. Now, having said that, I do want to specifically call out something that also should have been pointed out in the facilities planning. We didn't mention it. The workspace where we have the biggest hygiene issue for customers and clients and for staff is our public health building. Council knows that. It's part of our plan when we're looking at a new community health and wellness center. I want to make sure that every time we have a conversation about facility planning, that we mention that public health is top of mind for us. We have it in this larger plan for facilities that's coming forward in a couple years. And so when we start talking about other areas that we're looking at, I want to make sure that our staff in public health know that we're not leaving them behind in this conversation. Okay. And then finally, replacement of retaining walls around our community, about $200,000. We have a number of retaining walls that are just decaying and, I wouldn't say in danger of collapse, but they're neither attractive nor particularly reliable right now. And so our public works staff will get out there and replace a number of those as well. And then finally, $350,000 for a yet unspecified natural resource project, or perhaps several projects. We have a study being done right now with our looking at those options for natural resource projects, and I'm anticipating that we will see recommendations in the very near future that we will then bring back to council so that we can move forward on those. Again, natural resource is an important element of our park system master plan, and we have a number of people in the community who are very concerned about our commitment to natural resources, and this is a down payment on that commitment as well. So those are the recommendations we have in front of you, and happy to answer any questions.
Council, questions? Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Yay for natural resources. You knew I was going to say that, right? If you could add a 0 to that number, it would still be making me happy. That's great. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. Is the active transportation plan study going to include bringing the ADA study forward? Because they kind of sit as two separate things right now, and I'd love to see them more integrated. You mentioned accessibility in your comment here, City Manager, so I'm just wondering if that's the actual expectation, and if we actively, if we look at that active transportation plan in the future, will we have our ADA recommendations and our plan for that included in there?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, Councilmember D'Alessandro. Carl may be able to speak more to the specifics, but here's what I'll say is that our ADA specialist within the city, Tracy Smith, works with our engineering staff on a number of these issues. I would fully anticipate that ADA will be a consideration in the process. I don't know, Carl, if there's more that you want to add to it specifically.
I would note that the specific scope for this study hasn't been developed yet, and so we appreciate the comment, and that's something we'll take a look at to see if it makes sense within the amount of monies that we have and the work plan we put together to add that into it. So I don't think we specifically had excluded it, and we haven't specifically included it. So we're still working on the scope.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And Mr. Mayor, just a comment there. I think that, when we think about a sidewalks or trails as part of an active transportation plan, the ADA compliance requirement is a function of that, I understand. But compliance and being planful about, as Ms. Jackson mentioned, curb cuts have evolved, right? So curb cuts used to look one way, and now they look another way, because we know that actively managing, not just for compliance, but actually for usage is a better plan. And so I'd love to see those kind of more thoughtfully integrated if possible, and if budgeting allows. The only other comment I make, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Mr. Keel, is that my wife will be very upset that you're getting 10 F-150s before hers comes in. Just letting you know.
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember D'Alessandro, I do not promise when we will receive delivery of those vehicles. This is just getting them purchased.
Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. Just 3 quick things now. I'll start down here and work my way up. So, and maybe I'm not understanding this, but I'm not sure if we're making a recommendation today, or is this something that could wait till we get to the budget? I'm just trying to understand why pull this stuff forward today rather than wait till we have our overall budget conversation, because that may change how we want to look at these things.
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman, many of these items have not been identified in the budget, and so because of budget decisions or budget limitations are ones that are probably going to continue to be deferred. Some of these are ones that we could include in bonding. When I talk about like the Smith Park or the Family Aquatic Center, those types of things we could include in bonding, but we have an opportunity here to deliver them more quickly, and that also saves us from having to bond for them and the long-term price associated with that as well.
So I guess I get the rationale, but wouldn't it make more sense if you want to have a fuller picture of what all we have coming to wait till that overall conversation? Because once we get to that standpoint where we have the overall conversation, we might go, you know what, maybe we don't want to do the items that you have here. maybe this is more of a priority, and so we should shift our dollars towards that. I'm just curious about in terms of how we're positioning, when we're doing this, as opposed to, because now it's kind of like we're cutting up the budgeting process and we're looking at this as it's a standalone kind of piece.
I think, Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman, what we were trying to do was be responsive to what we sensed from the council, a desire to get moving on some projects and start making a difference that people can see in the community. And by having projects that we can finish yet this year, that we're able to do that. If we wait through the budgeting process, we won't be getting started on these projects until next spring or summer, and they're essentially delayed by a year. And we know these are projects that, will make a difference in the system.
Fair enough. I think we can stop you on the roasting on that one. So then, for the amounts, I noticed as you were going through this, some of them you were telling us the amounts, and others of them you were not. And so, but I'm not going to make you go through all and give us all the amounts. But I just was curious about a couple of them under the police items. When we talk about the body scanner for the jail, I didn't catch that price on that one. And then the second one is the shared values, which will lead me into my final question.
Yeah. So the body scanner is about $140,000. The shared values organizational process is $125,000, and that's actually going to unfold over about an 18-month time frame. So it's an extended duration project.
So, and that's where I want to challenge you, because I see a couple of things on here that kind of, when you laid out this to start off with, you said these are going to be kind of one-time things, and they won't have, although the tails will be limited, is what I thought I heard you say. Yes. And so I want to challenge you on that one, and then also the natural resources. And I'm particularly concerned about the natural resources one, because I get concerned that we have a big number and we solve, cut down a bunch of buckthorn in an area, and then we're not able to sustain that over time. It's kind of the point the mayor's made earlier about, this kind of the capital expenses where we look good for a while by kind of constantly keeping the rate down low, but then we're paying for it out of another pocket, and so. So I just want to challenge you both on those two initiatives. Certainly there's other ones in here that I could do. You laid out a principle. Why does that fit? Because as I look at what you laid out, and then as I'm looking at this, that doesn't make any sense to me. So,
Mr. Mayor, council members, Councilmember Lohman, challenge accepted. So with the shared values organizational process, I feel like Mortal Kombat. With the shared values process, this is the cost for a consultant service. And so we're just finishing up an RFP process, and pending council approval, we'll execute a contract with a consultant. And so it is the cost for the consultant to deliver the services that go along with this. And it's a very participatory process, both with the department members and also community members too. So when I say that it is starting immediately, right? When I say we're going to start making immediate impact, but this is a change management process that will unfold over a year and a half's time or so, and so that just takes a little work. There isn't an ongoing cost associated with this particular project, because as soon as the consultant's work is done, the contract is terminated. Okay. On the second piece regarding the natural resource project, like I mentioned, we have the report on those potential projects coming back, and before we proceed on anything, we will come back with to the council, so you have the opportunity to look at those projects and answer questions about whether there's residual maintenance or other obligations associated with any of those projects at the point that you approve them.
So first one, I accept your answer. The second one, I don't. So I think
here's what I would say is that we don't have any funds dedicated to a natural resource project right now, and we need to have funds from somewhere, whatever the projects are, to get them done. So what we're trying to do is resource the work going forward.
I appreciate that, and all I'm saying is that like what we have with we have our loan program housing, that kind of it's revolving. We know where those dollars are coming from. PMP, we know where those dollars are coming from. And so I just, we talked about not having tails on it. I think that one does have a tail on it. I'm not saying I'm against it or anything, but I certainly am supportive of it, but I just want us to recognize what we're doing there, and we need to identify a source as soon as possible. So
Yeah, we may have to feed the goats, Councilmember Loman. That might be an ongoing commitment.
Well, and I appreciate also, as Mr. Verbrugge said, and this is in response to our council retreat that we basically said, go, 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 go. We've got to find projects and let's get going on some of these things. Enough talk, enough belly button gazing. Let's get some work done. And so I appreciate that with these funds available, they can take on some of these projects. And especially if they can take them on starting now and get it done by the end of the year, all the better. All the better.
yeah, absolutely agree. Don't have any problem with that. But when you lead off by saying these things don't have a tail, and I see a tail, I think it's our responsibility as stewards of tax dollars to ask those questions. So certainly I want to get going. So I don't hear that. I definitely want you to spend as much money, add a couple of zeros, as my colleague says, to the natural resources. But then on the other hand, the mayor, you said eloquently earlier, hey, we got to pay for this. So and I totally agree with you on that. So.
Councilmember Martin and Councilmember D'Alessandro. Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, so the space planning study for engineering and fleet, I'm just wondering how that particular study relates to the larger planning we're doing for the new fleet maintenance facility. Are we planning, could there be a surprise coming out of this that would change the layout of the space needs over there substantially?
I think this is primarily related to how do we repurpose the space where the existing fleet is, which is right adjacent to engineering. And so it's kind of a joint planning for those spaces together. Would also include, we have a couple of other pieces like the entrance to the building isn't as convenient for the public. So this will include looking at a new entrance to the building as well. But I don't think this inhibits the new fleet facility, but there's sort of a void in our campus. And this will answer the question, what happens to that space where fleet currently exists?
And I will say, if we need some feedback on tails, I can touch base with my black lab because he spends most of the day chasing his. But I'll keep you posted.
Amazing.
Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree, Councilmember Lohman, with your assessment on tails for natural resources, although I'd argue that there are probably some natural resources projects that don't have those same tails, right? Like tearing down a tree that's bad and putting up a tree that's native, like kind of done and done, right? So hopefully they're thinking about those things. I would agree with that. I had a follow-up question on the decisions. I believe I saw some exchange in email about this, but I just wanted to bring it up. I've heard from constituents about the steps at Moore Park, for example, and a couple of other key places where things are, people are unhappy with the condition of them and they consider them quite unsafe or maybe unseemly. I'm just curious if you can explain, where we're at with some of those infrastructures elements that we've heard about in the last couple of months, and why they're not on this list.
Sure.
Thank you.
Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Councilmember D'Alessandro. Regarding the stairs, our staff has been out in the last couple of weeks evaluating a number of them. I will say with Moyer Park, even though we have two stairs that are closed right now, we do have ample ways to access the park currently other than with those stairways. So there are alternatives. And I think staff's feeling right now is the master planning around Moyer should probably be allowed to happen before we start to invest a significant amount of funds. Stairs aren't cheap, right? Fixing them. With the other parks where we have some issues, those are probably going to get resolved within the next 12 months. So it's just a matter of prioritizing them based on their condition.
Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have 7 questions. Honestly.
I thought you were going to say one question in 26 parts.
No, they're all, I don't know how many parts each of them will have, but so I'll just jump in. First one, I added up the numbers and there's $475,000 to study stuff. Mm-hmm. 13.6% of the funding is going towards studying. And so my question is kind of to Councilmember Lohman's question. That sounds like it's going to have a significant tail. I mean, I can't imagine we're going to study stuff and come back and say, we should spend less money. We should hire few people. So that is a concern in terms of looking forward, that these are going to create things. I don't necessarily disagree with them, but as one example, there's mention of the alternative transportation plan being updated. Would we be better off taking those funds and just putting into implementing our current plan instead of updating or a new plan, you know, and can you talk to that trade-off?
Sure. Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Nelson, I think there are a couple things to consider when we are looking at the alternative transportation plan, which I agree probably wasn't resourced to the extent that it could have been or maybe should have been when it was first adopted. I would say a couple of things have changed since that ATP was adopted. One is that the demographics of the community have continued to evolve. And I would say that some of the strategic priorities for the council, particularly the attention that is paid to issues of equity, were not reflected in the ATP when it was adopted. Right? And I would argue that one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we are not moving forward with ideas about where we want to invest without making sure that those considerations are part of that process. And I don't think the ATP really had that element considered when it was developing priorities.
I appreciate that information, Mr. City Manager, and I would probably point out that $70,000 will get us about 3 feet of sidewalk or so or trail. So, so that I just wanted to put it out there because I know it was actually one of Ms. Jackson's first exercises with us as a council to kind of go through that thought process. And, you know, even though it's in my district, I always talk about not paving both sides of Normandale, even though there's room when sidewalks are crumbling in other parts of the city. The other part of that then, second part of the first question, is as we look at that alternative transportation, you mentioned the demographics. I would just like to make sure that we take a look at how we can meet the needs of the seniors in our community. We have a lot of them that struggle to get access to groceries, churches, parks, those types of things. And there's some other models, not just park and trail type stuff or trail and sidewalk, but you know, even commuter type services and door-to-door services and things like that. I know Scott County has a program where it's a bus service for seniors mostly, or anybody, but it's on demand, and then they'll take you to large places. It won't take you wherever you want. It's not Uber, but it'll get you to the big facilities. It'll get you to shopping. So anyways, I would just encourage, if possible, when we're doing that, to look at how we can meet the needs of our seniors in there. In terms of the parks, we have the budget that we bond for, but then we also have park maintenance that we budget for every year. Will those maintenance projects still be happening? And one of them in particular, and I don't need an answer to this right now, I know when COVID happened, South Glen Park was scheduled to be resurfaced. At that point, it was held off because of COVID, didn't know where budgets are going, and if I could just at some point get an update on where that might be and when that might happen. The speed limit item, is it possible to broaden that to include other considerations? Because, you know, I do hear the speed, but as I've said before, the bigger concern that I hear from people is the cut-through traffic. And they're kind of combined because a lot of the cut-through traffic drives faster, but, you know, we used to have signs, you know, local traffic only, or even, you know, Nesbitt gets semi-trucks going down it. And, you know, maybe that's no trucks allowed, other, you know, local or something like that. I know we used to have signs, we got rid of them, it's been explained to me, but just looking at the whole toolkit of things there.
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Nelson, I would say similar to what Mr. Keel said earlier, scope has not been developed on this study, so we can certainly come back to council and check in to make sure that we are putting together the scope that you are expecting us to pursue before we move forward with it.
Fantastic. This came up at one of the first park plans that was in my district over at Sunrise, and there was talk in the information that I got, they were looking at what they could do at natural resources there. And I think to Councilmember Lohman's point, I think that natural resources will happen as part of a lot of those plans, and that may ultimately be part of the funding source as we go forward. Am I correct in understanding that?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Nelson, that's an accurate assumption about how we're going to be proceeding forward. And let me come back to one of your earlier questions that I didn't have an opportunity to answer. That's okay. It was more of a statement, but I'm going to answer it anyway. And that's just about the tails associated with the studies. So yes, there may be obligations created by the recommendations from the study. You're never going to be obligated to doing those. I would say the speed study is an excellent example of the most important thing coming out of it is information, right? I mean, we have certain perceptions or presumptions about conditions in our neighborhoods, and hopefully this will help validate some of those. And then give us options for policies. And, the active transportation study, that plan is intended to be able to identify not only needed investment, but also prioritization, right, which maybe doesn't exist today. And then that allows you to plan for a longer-term future of how you're going to approach those investments. And then, like I mentioned before, with the EV charging station study, that study specifically is intended so that we have an implementation plan ready to go, which allows us to go out and get OPM, right? Other people's monies, grant funds that may be available, whether it's from the federal government or foundations or others who are interested in advancing, EV prevalence throughout the community. So.
Good. I like the thoughtful approach.
Yep.
I think I'm down to 2 questions here. The filter UV at the pool, it was mentioned earlier in tonight's meeting that we have to replace the liner in potentially 30 or 31. Does this filter UV impact that at all? What is the life of this type of filter?
Mr. Mayor, council members, Councilmember Nelson, I'm going to invite our Parks and Recreation Director, Ann Catry, to answer that question.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Nelson. That filtration system and UV system would be able to be used with new pool renovations. So it would be in a separate building and would be reused, and it has a long, probably at least a 15-year life span. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. Last question I have is, most of the time when we do a budget, we have public hearings. Is that something we need to do, should do, to get input from the public on these items?
Mr. Mayor, council members, Councilmember Nelson, that's certainly an option that would be available to you. I think the ones that are going to benefit the community most visibly and immediately, the park system investments, are ones that are coming out of the park system master plan, which certainly had a good amount of community engagement with them. If you felt there was more engagement that we should do for the balance of these items, we could certainly pursue something along those lines.
I think it's not a terrible idea. What I don't want to do is slow these down. I mean,
If we were going to do it, I would want to do it as quick as possible.
yeah.
Sorry. If we were going to do it, I'd like to do it as quick as possible, and it's just, I've said that before. I appreciate the engagement, and maybe there's something we're missing, but I don't want to put it on November's agenda.
Yeah, no, I don't want to do that either.
So I'm not trying to slow it down. I think these are great ideas. I appreciate the work that's gone into it, and the thoughtfulness of it. And but I just, like I said, in general, if we're going to spend $3.5 million, might make sense to open it up to the public just to get some feedback, see where they're at.
Councilmember D'Alessandro?
I guess a point of clarification, do you normally get public comment on strategic priorities fund spending, or I thought that was kind of a council prerogative?
I believe you are right, Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, council members, Councilmember D'Alessandro, that's true. That has been the past practice. I would also say that when we have been allocating funds from the Strategic Priorities Fund, that it's usually not a whole list like what's in front of you. It's usually one or two discrete items. that have developed over some time. So my whole point of saying that is just because we've always done it one way doesn't mean we have to keep doing it that way, and I think that's kind of the point of the questions. And so that's why I say if there's something you feel here that would benefit from having some additional engagement, we can do that. Part of what I want to emphasize is that a good number of the things on this list have risen to the top simply because of the engagement that we've already done.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Manager. No pushback to your comment, Councilmember Nelson. I mostly just wanted to understand the process. From my perspective, there's lots of ways to get community engagement. We could try one of the more, the quicker ones. I don't know, something like that, so it doesn't impede the progress. I mostly just would love to see some of this actually get done, if possible. Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Coulter?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess, to my mind, and, I generally, particularly when it comes to budget items, I do generally think it's a good idea to get community feedback. I would say, I think, frankly, the area that's going to have the most interest would be the park improvements. That would just be my sort of supposition. And to the city manager's point, there's already been, I think, a significant amount of engagement with the park system master plan and all that. And I think part of my fear would be that, the conversation would revolve around the park improvements, and every question would be, well, why not this particular thing that may be a valuable and good thing to spend on, but there's a set priority here, there's a process in place. So I think, the way I look at this, these are all, there would undoubtedly be feedback and discussion. I frankly have a hard time seeing a significant percentage of the community necessarily oppose these things in particular. And I think these are good things. These are relatively easy things to move forward on. And I think to the mayor's point as well, when we had our council retreat, one of the messages we certainly made very clear was, we wanted to see things move forward, in particular on sustainability and natural resources and executing and implementing the park system master plan. So if we want to get feedback, I think it's always good to get more information. I'm just not sure that the feedback we'd get would necessarily really change the direction or the proposal or anything like that in a significant way. And so I guess I'd prefer to just move forward tonight.
Councilmember Lohman?
So, I think it's a great question to ask, because of where this money came from. It's coming from general funds, and it's kind of being rolled over into the strategic priorities. I know that traditionally we have not done that with strategic priorities, and so there's a part of me, as a traditionalist, I guess, here that says, hey, we haven't done this before, so let's not. But I think that where I kind of fall on this is that while I do think that because these dollars are being spent, will it move the needle? And that's kind of where I'm at. Will this move the needle? Having public comment on it, I don't know that it would. I don't know that it would really change how we address these items. Maybe we would take a couple items off of here or not. But I do think what it would do is really delay the process. Because I tried in my mind, I was thinking maybe we could do, the town hall has gotten rescheduled, maybe we could make that a section of it. But then how much public comment are you going to get? And then you have, so many of these items in here just logistically. And then how are you going to present these items? And I think that where this comes down to, we have had this overrun, and I think we've got to try to, and this is not the discussion for today, find how we can not have that happen. And I think the manager really laid out why this happened. These are really unique circumstances. But I think that since we've been elected to kind of do this, I think it's kind of our responsibility to kind of, here with these types of items or these dollars, kind of make the best strategic decision that we can. And that this is our way of applying some of that authority or some of what we've been responsible for doing. So that's just kind of my take. Maybe it's wrong or right. So,
Councilmember Nelson?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I don't disagree with any of my colleagues. I mean, that's the way we've done it in the past. I don't know that it's going to move the needle. Just for clarification, my idea was to just put it in Section 4 at our next meeting and just have the hearing there. I'm not looking for anything elaborate or special town hall or anything like that. Just open it up that if somebody wanted to come here and say some words or call into us and say something. So I'm talking 2 weeks at most, if that's workable. I don't want to delay this. I don't want to overly burdensome process. These things are clearly community priorities. We've talked about it a number of times. I mean, the Smith Park thing, I mean, staff has been out there, met with residents in the neighborhood, talked these things through. I mean, we have done, exceptional engagement on some of these issues already. So I'm not looking for a big process. I'm should it be in Section 4 instead of 5?
Yeah, no, and I wouldn't want to squash that thought because yes, it's a good thought on your part. But I agree with Councilmember Lohman. I mean, and others who have said. I mean, these are not new. Maybe the specific tasks might be a new consideration, but these priorities, these are things we've talked about, and I think for the most part, this is something that I'm comfortable with moving forward, just based on the past conversations, based on the good discussions at the retreat, based on what I know that the staff they have heard what we've been saying, and to go out and to find these projects that are one-timers that they can get done quickly. So I'm personally comfortable moving forward tonight with this. Councilmember Nelson?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just one last thought on that then. That does seem to be the general sense, and I totally agree with it. I understand where you're coming from. I'd just open it up to people in the public. If they did look at this list and have some questions, concerns, thoughts, we have listening sessions.
Yep, absolutely.
It won't be on the agenda next time then, and we have a listening session. Come in, and these are going to take time to develop scope and all the details. And so if you have something of value for that input, there is still an opportunity for anyone that wants to.
Agreed. Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Also, anything else? I will add also the notion about the speed limit study. I would agree that I don't want to limit it to just speed limit. As we talked about, it's as what I guess I was the one who talked about it, the combination of not only enforcement, but it's also the education and the environment. Building our streets and intersections in such a way that it slows traffic where necessary, that we educate people that slow down, darn it. And then there is, of course, the enforcement piece of this as well. It's the speed limit. So I would like to make sure that this is a comprehensive look at how we can slow people down in our neighborhoods without simply dropping the speed limits to a set amount and hope that they comply with that. So, okay, Council, I think we've talked about just about every aspect of this. Councilmember Coulter?
Mayor, I'm happy to make a motion.
Councilmember Coulter.
Mayor, I will move to authorize allocation of $3.49 million of Strategic Priorities Fund dollars for projects as detailed in the attached recommendation.
Second?
Motion by Councilmember Coulter, second by Councilmember D'Alessandro to authorize the allocation of $3.49 million of Strategic Priorities Fund dollars. No further council discussion on this? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Well, thank you to you, Mr. Verbrugge, for your leadership on this. Thank you to staff for bringing forward, I think, some very good ideas. And now, go get them. Go. Love to see this work get done. So, thank you for that. Item 5.3 on our agenda is the City Council Policy and Issue Update. Mr. Verbrugge.
Mr. Mayor and council members, just want to, if folks haven't seen on our social media and sort of the all play notifications we've sent out, the town hall that was scheduled for tomorrow evening at the band shell at Normandale Lake Park will be postponed due to the expectation of extreme heat conditions. That was in consultation with our emergency management coordinator, Chief Seal. We felt that was best to put that date off. I will endeavor to have a new date scheduled by the end of this week, and we'll communicate that back to the council. We've also heard some concern expressed about the venue and wanting to have indoor versus outdoor. One of the intents was just looking at, again, trying to build some variety into how we provide these different engagement opportunities and where we go. And generally, summer in Minnesota is beautiful, and we usually don't have a heat index over 100. And so, I thought we would try to take advantage of beautiful July in Minnesota. And no good deed goes unpunished, Mr. Mayor. So.
And I think the other part of that, Mr. Verbrugge, I've heard from more than one person, well, why not just move it inside to all these air-conditioned spaces that you have? And clearly, the Schneider Theater would be perfect for it, except for the fact that Shrek the Musical is on the stage there. And it's not available, not usable. We also talked about the possibility of the Black Box Theater. And I'll admit to being the one who kind of nixed that because I just didn't think it was going to be big enough in terms of the number of people that I would expect to show up for this kind of thing. So this was, as Mr. Verbrugge said, I thought it was a good opportunity. If only we had done this last week when the highs were in the mid-80s and the humidity was nice and low, it would have been perfect. And just so happened that that's not the case, and we will get it rescheduled just as soon as possible. Any questions of Mr. Verbrugge, staff, council? Anything? Then I would like to just chime in. I'm sorry?
I apologize. I have a couple things I'd like to mention, but after your...
We'll get to you in just one
Yeah,
second.
perfect.
I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to recap what we heard at our listening session this evening. We had 4 speakers this evening. Ms. Linda Blair spoke about election integrity and her opposition to ranked choice voting. Sally Ness continued the discussion about the conditional use permit that was issued 11 or 12 years ago and specific questions regarding that. Paul Coate stopped by. He talked in support of the Pride celebration and the need for a Pride celebration in the community and some concerns for safety at the Pride celebration. And a gentleman named Hassan, and Matt, I did not get Hassan's last name. Do you know it off the top of your head?
Mayor, I believe it was Hassan Guled.
Thank you. We had a nice discussion about organics recycling. He's opposed to the charges for it, the required charges for it. And we had a good discussion, and he advocated strongly that we do a better job of public engagement and public education about the program in general. And I think we all agreed with him on that. And we did talk more, and I know that our first year goal for organics recycling was to have 25% of the community engaged in it and participating in organics recycling, and right now we're at about 23%, so we're getting close to our first year goal on that. So that was our listening session this evening. Councilmember D'Alessandro, you had a couple of items you wanted to bring forward?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A while back, the conversation tonight about the active transportation plan reminded me to ask about whether or not we have an update on the synthesis of the process that was used by the residents over in, I think it was off of Louisiana Avenue, to advocate for some traffic conditioning work there. And one of the outcomes of that was like, oh, that's something we should make sure is well-defined and is easy to get to residents if they would like to do that kind of self-assessed project in the future. And I haven't heard an update on that, and so it reminded me to remind you to give us that if you have it or whatever. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, Councilmember D'Alessandro, we'll check in with engineering, see first of all if we've had any other neighborhoods that have come forward expressing interest in a similar process. And again, this is the process for areas where neighbors would like to see some traffic management options studied and potentially implemented, that there is an identified way of doing that. I think the greater point of your question, though, is have we improved or raised awareness that process exists and people can avail themselves of that. We'll check in with engineering and get back to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I had a resident contact me not long after that study to ask, how can we do that in our neighborhood? And I said, well, we're going to put that together, and maybe I'll have a handout for you or point you to the website or whatever. And then I haven't been able to do that. So yeah, anything we could do to help folks with that would be great. And then secondly, I want to plus one, Mr. Hassan Glay's comments on organics. And I did have a conversation with you, Mr. City Manager, earlier today. There is a consistent conversation that I think takes on 2 tacks. One is the conversation about, I don't use it, I don't want to pay for it. And that's a conversation we have about a lot of city services, right? And I know, Mr. Mayor, you said tonight something similar to what I say, which is I don't have kids in the school system. I also don't use curbside cleanup, but I sure pay for it as part of, my utility bill, right? And so those are all things we do for the greater good, and I hope that people would consider, eliminating tons of waste from a landfill as a greater good. But another piece of it is a conversation I have with folks who say, the process, the utility process in general, or the organics or trash or recycling process in general is cumbersome for me. I'm an older couple, and it's hard for me to move one can down to the end of my driveway, let alone 4 cans. Now, I maybe contribute 1 bag of garbage every 2 weeks to the smallest bin I have. Can I share with my neighbor? Like, I'm wondering if there's some creativity that we can create around how that might be different. Is there a every other week program for certain residents? Is there a discount program? Is there other? I just would like to encourage that. And if you all are hearing it, I just don't know if you all are hearing about it or not. And if this is bubbling up for everyone, maybe it's something we think about, and not just for organics, but because organics has kind of brought this other question to the forefront. So I don't, what do you all think? I guess is an open question for me.
I'd love to jump in on that one. I've heard that many a times too, and I've had conversations with the manager and with the Sustainability Commission. In fact, we've heard this every other week kind of thing before. We're not new to that from the council perspective, and I have driven and asked for creativity on this. One of the issues that staff is running into with some of the creative ideas is, one being either with a contract that we currently have. That's one element. The secondary piece, which I don't necessarily agree with, but this is what's been brought forward, and I want to make sure I'm on board with that, is that there's a concern with, as we start moving around and changing, how we handle trash and these different elements, how we're going to pay for this. And so, if somebody decides that they're going to go with a certain can configuration, and if we have a lower price on that, are we going to be able to sustain it with the rest of those pricing? And then also equity issues as well, I've heard raised as well, in terms of if you've got a larger family, that also can be an impact. So it's not to say that we shouldn't do some of these creative ideas. I'm with you on that. I want to see some of these things, but when you get down to the level of details on them, that's where some of the difficulty that staff, at least, has been communicating back to me. They're having a difficult time trying to operationalize and make these things happen. So I'm certainly a council member who also would like to see some things done differently with that, and I keep pushing every single Sustainability Commission meeting that I'm there about that, because I hear this. It's an ongoing course when I'm knocking on doors, when I'm getting emails, I'm getting phone calls. That it's an ongoing thing about these. But these are some of the things that I'm hearing from staff, and I would sure love to have more council members to help me to kind of push this along. But I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's one council member's perspective.
Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. And Councilmember D'Alessandro and I have talked about this a little bit, shot the city manager a quick note about it. But even just over the longer term, if there's some kind of cost offsets for folks that just functionally are not using the entire capacity of these bins. We've got a 2-person household right now, and I'm happy to use the organics collection, but I've only ever seen 2 bags in it by the time it gets picked up. So I understand it, the end goal, diverting a lot of this organic material away from the incinerator. But if there's a way for, say, a senior that may be in their home on their own now, that even at the smallest amounts in all these bins isn't going to come anywhere close to filling these up, is there some kind of income qualified program we can do to offset some of that burden, especially considering the savings we've seen with the shifts to curbside cleanup? So I don't know what that would look like, but I'm guessing there's cities out there that have done something similar that wouldn't take us peeling apart the entire contract and stuff like that. So.
Good thoughts. All good thoughts. Good conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate everybody's attention to that, and just I'm hoping that we can maybe think out of the box on this, or maybe do some studying or whatever. So appreciate that. I think there was one other thing that I kind of thought about when you mentioned it, Councilmember Lohman, and now I've forgotten it. So I guess I'll table that, and thank you for the chance to make some points there.
Council members, anything else? Councilmember Lohman.
Again, not to have the conversation tonight. That's what the category is for these items. We can talk about this some other time. Just kind of renewing and understanding, and we talk about fairness in our meetings. Earlier we had a topic that came up that was on the agenda. And, it's sometimes it's tough, right? You don't want to stop somebody right in the middle. So I don't know. I just think we need to kind of have a game plan with that. And again, I don't want to necessarily talk about that tonight, but I think that's something we all need to be on the same page in terms of, because if we have folks who are able to talk on one side of the issue, I also want to give the opportunity for somebody else to be able to talk on the opposite side of.
I'm trying to remember our rules of procedure that we put together for our listening sessions. I don't know that we specified items not on the agenda.
I don't know that we did either. That's why I didn't call you on it.
Well, Ms. Manderscheid,
I looked into that, Mayor.
look at you.
It's ready to go. Our listening session guidelines say the session is intended for topics not on the city council agenda that same day. So the intent. But if you recall, for those of you that were on the council, there was also, we worded it this way on purpose because there was also the conversation related to consent agenda items. And folks wanted a heads up if people had concerns, and there was a concern that there was no other forum to do that. And so that's why we stated it the way we did, to give people a heads up if there was otherwise not an opportunity. And then with regard to time, we said up to 10 minutes per speaker and topic, in that we had some language in here about pre-registered people would be called on first before the not pre-registered. And some other language about sort of dividing up the time based on the number of people that were there and such.
So I think in answer to your question, Councilmember, I think the intent is, yes, we typically don't want that. But I think also it worked out tonight with 4 speakers. I think everybody got an opportunity and got a chance to speak. And I think the intent is not to do it that way, but if it presents itself and it's manageable, I'm comfortable with it personally. And it was good to get the feedback because there was not an opportunity for feedback at the.
Well, as long as you're comfortable with that, I just didn't feel comfortable with that part of it. If we're talking about this topic, I got a couple other items, but
I was just going to add on to this.
Okay. Councilmember Coulter, something to add?
Yeah, I think, Mayor, I think I share that concern, and I think from my perspective, the concern is if that becomes sort of a quasi-public hearing where, we have, tonight it was one person and it was manageable, but if we have, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 people showing up who all want to talk about this one particular item, then it becomes a little bit more unmanageable. And I don't think that's something we need to deal with unless and until it does happen. But that was the concern I had, is if it just becomes basically another forum for a public hearing.
I agreed with you. Agree with you on that. I mean, these are new. These are a work in progress. We're trying to figure our way through all of this. I think so far we've managed things pretty well. This is an item that we'll take into account next time we come across it. It's good feedback.
Don't go a little quicker here on a couple of the items here. I got one other thing for you about organics. We can talk about that later. I don't have to. It's just specifically for you. But I want to just make a note that I wanted to talk to you about that. And then scenic views. Again, all under the items of not talking about today. I know we had it on the agenda earlier today, but I think we need to, and I'm not asking for it in the next year. I know we've got a big layout, but if we could at some point come back and look at our scenic view policy so that we're consistent across the city with that, because I think in some regards it's kind of haphazardly, and I wanted to just have a good understanding of why did we have that, what does it provide for our city, and does it make sense to kind of go about doing it that way, or is there maybe some other process that we could kind of do? Again, I'm not asking, we've got next year kind of laid out, maybe this is a couple years out there kind of thing we could look at. And then the last thing I was just going to mention is around, we've got a lot of items for transportation. And one of the things I'm concerned about from a policy perspective is, we certainly, it's a part of the planning commission, but I'm just concerned as we kind of move forward with a number of these studies and things that we make sure that we're balancing, my colleague, Councilmember Nelson has mentioned it and other colleagues have mentioned, making sure we're making sure seniors and other groups are a part of these conversations. And so I don't know if it makes sense to, have a work group or some kind of way to make sure that as we look at some of these policies or some other practices that those groups are included in that, or in that also we're able to execute on some of these things when they come about. And I know we're not at that stage right now of execution, but as we're doing that planning, I think we need to kind of think about those as we kind of move forward. So,
I would agree with you, Councilmember. And if you recall in the council retreat, I think it was a very broad category of basically getting people from A to B and doing it effectively and efficiently and doing it well. And I think falling under that it would include making sure all of our different constituent groups, our constituencies, are addressed in that way. Whether it's our senior population, whether it's folks who are carless or for whatever reason. And so I'm waiting to see how that all kind of shakes out. And I know we've got a session on that coming up, I believe in August. What some of the action plans in place after our strategic planning process or after our goal setting kind of thing, how it all kind of fits together and works in. So agree with you, and it's good to bring it up. And I think I hope, I'm sure the message has been received. So, Councilmember D'Alessandro, quick one.
I remembered, if you don't mind.
Please.
Thank you, sir. Just curious if we've heard from our friends at the private owners of the DMVs of whether or not they're coming back around again or anything. Thank you. Sorry, I knew I remembered something.
Mr. Verbrugge.
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember D'Alessandro, we have not heard any update on that issue. So we will reach out again.
Council, anything else? All right. A reminder once again to everybody watching, we don't have a council meeting next week. We adjusted our schedule, and we don't have a meeting next week. We don't have a meeting on August 1st either, just the way the council calendar breaks. And so our next council meeting will not be until August 8th. So we've got a couple weeks off here. And a reminder to everybody, because we don't have anything between now and then, August 2nd is, of course, National Night Out, and looking forward to seeing everybody out and about in the neighborhoods on National Night Out. It's Tuesday, August 2nd. Hope you've got your neighborhood party planned. Anything else, Council? If not, I would look for a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Lohman, second by Councilmember D'Alessandro to adjourn this evening's meeting. No further council discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much for your work tonight. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Thanks to staff. Good work tonight. Thanks. Have a good night.